Let's begin with limit as h approaches 0 of square root 5h plus 4 minus 2 over h. If I plug in h is 0, the denominator here is 0. So I'll get 1 over 0, and this is not defined. So what I'm going to do here is multiply the top and the bottom by square root 5h plus 4 plus 2 over square root 5h plus 4 plus 2. So this is known as the conjugate. Okay, so I have limit as h approaches 0. Here I have a difference of two squares. So this is the same thing as a minus b times a plus b. Right, so where a is square root 5h plus 4 and b is 2. And we know that this is a squared minus b squared. So that's going to be 5h plus 4 squared minus 2 squared, which is 4, over h times square root 5h plus 4 plus 2. In this step, students will often distribute the h over here to the square root and the 2, but oftentimes it's going to cancel out, so it's good to just leave it factored in this form. Now the square root and the square are going to cancel each other, so you have limit as h approaches 0 of 5h plus 4 minus 4 over h times the square root of 5h plus 4 plus 2. The 4's are going to cancel each other, and then I'm left with 5h. h also cancels. So this limit now turns into, let's see, limit h approaches 0, 5 over square root 5h plus 4 plus 2. I can plug in h equals 0. That goes to 0, so I'm left with 5 over square root 4 plus 2, and that will just be 5 over 4. Let's go on to the next one. Given limit as x approaches 5 of x minus 5 over x squared minus 25, I can use some algebra because, well, first you should always check to plug it in. So if you plug in 5 for x, you get 0 over 0. So a good way to solve this problem is by factoring out the denominator. So if we factor that out, we get x minus 5 times x plus 5. The x minus 5 cancel, and you're left with 1 over x plus 5. And if I plug in 5 in for x, I get 1 over 10. Let's go on to the next one. Limit as x approaches 3, or sorry, negative 3 of x plus 3 over x squared plus 4x plus 3. I first plug in negative 3, and I get 0 over 0. So that means I have some work to do. I'm going to factor the denominator. So the denominator factors into x plus 3 and x plus 1. Here, the x plus 3's cancel, and I'm left with 1 over x plus 1. I plug in x equals negative 3 to get 1 over negative 2. So negative 1/2 is my final answer. Okay, let's try this. Limit x approaches negative 5 of x squared plus 3x minus 10 over x plus 5. I plug in negative 5 in for x, and I get 0 over 0. So now I'm going to simplify So I'm going to factor out the numerator. So that factors into x plus 5, x minus 2. I have both a x plus 5 at the top, x plus 5 on the bottom. So now I'm left with x minus 2. So if I plug in negative 5 in for x, my limit becomes negative 7. Okay, let's try a similar one. We have limit x approaches 2 of x squared minus 7x minus 10 over x minus 2. I plug in x is 2 and I get 0 over 0. So I'm going to factor the top. I have x minus 2 over x minus 5. And in the bottom I have x minus 2. There's x minus 2 in both the numerator and denominator. That's going to go away. And now I could just plug in x equals 2 to get negative 3. That's my final answer. Next, we have limit as t approaches 1 of t squared plus t minus 2 over t squared minus 1. I plug in t as 1, I get, again, 0 over 0. So now I have to not only factor the top, but I also have to factor the bottom. So I'm going to have limit as t approaches 1. T squared plus t minus 2, that's just t plus 2 t minus 1. And then the bottom will be t plus 1 t minus 1. Okay, the t minus 1s will cancel. And this is a plus. And if I plug in t as 1, I get 1 plus 2 at the top, and then 1 plus 1 at the bottom. So my limit is 3/2. Next, I have limit as t approaches negative 1 of t squared plus 3t plus 2 over t squared minus t minus 2. I'm going to actually first let's plug in negative 1, and by now you'd realize these problems will just give you 0 over 0. Or actually, no, this should be, yeah, should give you 0 over 0. So let's continue. And we want to factor this. So t squared plus 3t plus 2 will give me t plus 2, t plus 1. And the bottom will be t minus 2 and t plus 1. I can cancel out the t plus 1s. And if I plug in t as negative 1, I get 1 over negative 3. So negative 1/3 will be my limit. Next problem, we're given limit as x approaches negative 2 of negative 2x minus 4 over x cubed plus 2x squared. I plug in negative 2 and I get 0 over 0. So that means I'm going to have to do some algebra. So I'm going to, at the top I can factor out a negative 2. So then what's left is x plus 2. And the bottom, they both have a factor of x squared. And what's left is x plus 2. The x plus 2's will cancel. So I'm left with negative 2 over x squared. I plug in negative 2. So here we have to be careful with the negative, because we're going to be squaring the negative here. So this negative will be squared. So we get negative 2 over 4, which is negative 1/2. Okay, next one. Limit as y approaches 0 of 5y cubed plus 8y squared over 3y to the fourth minus 16y squared. They all have effectors of y, so we know this is going to be 0 over 0. So I'm going to simplify this. So I have limit as y approaches 0. I can pull out a y squared, and I'm left with 5y plus 8. And on the bottom, I can also factor out a y squared, and I'm left with 3y squared minus 16. The y squareds are going to cancel, and I plug in y as 0, so the top will just be 8, and the bottom will be negative 16. So my final answer is negative 1/2.